Hello there, I'm Alex Ioannou and I'm a doctoral researcher at Bangor University in North Wales. And I'll be presenting today on changing landscapes and places in flux. I trained to be a landscape architect because the relationship people share with landscape has always fascinated me. What interests me now is research carried out alongside people living in changing landscapes. This change is brought about by the dual threats of biodiversity loss and climate change, resulting in the need for adaptation and different management. Natural Resources Wales warns that climate change is projected to increase the frequency and intensity of droughts, river and coastal floods, and heat waves, expected to reduce ecosystem resilience further. The Climate Change Committee advises that transforming land is one of 4 key areas Wales can take action to reach net zero. The landscapes we know, the places we dwell in, will change and are changing. The Welsh Government calls for every citizen, community, group and business in Wales to embed the climate emergency in the way they think, work, play and travel. Studying Australian society, Juliet Peach and Ian McAllister point out that public opinion in advanced democracies is a key element in developing an appropriate policy response to mitigate climate change. There is an increasing awareness that local voices need to be heard and better understood when it comes to decision-making and policy responses. This conference is a testament to that. How do we respond as designers, as policymakers, as researchers to this increased need to involve communities? What methodologies are available to us? How can we help legitimize local decision-making and question the politics, power relations, and responsibilities connected to landscape? I want to share with you 4 multidisciplinary studies that used human-centered research methodologies. Using such methodologies, we too can work to legitimize and embolden the voices of the communities we hope to work with. Interviewer: are there any historical features on your land? Farmer: they tell me we've got burial mounds. They've been to look at it and it's been mapped out. We used to use it to load the cows for market. It's sloped up, you see, so we used to back the lorry up to it and run the cows into the lorry. These were the insights of a group of researchers received when carrying out 22 semi-structured interviews in Devon. Their aim was to find out more about the land and those who worked it during World War II. 4 broad themes were covered in the interviews, these being family history, World War II, landscape change, and landscape conservation. These themes became interchangeable, with respondents speaking out about more than one at a time. They found that family history was a helpful introductory theme to start the conversation. The quote on the screen from the farmer gets to the heart of the conversation about value and priorities, presenting a dichotomy between lay knowledge and expert knowledge. The researchers found that many farmers they interviewed defined importance through their very immediate concern of making a living from the land. This is contrary to valuing something in terms of its archaeological or heritage value. This is the belief held by traditional Western archaeological experts, and in extension, the state. These interviews and transcriptions help me understand and appreciate that listening to alternative and lived histories is important. By sharing this lay knowledge and recentering the stakeholders as knowing agents, attention can encompass wider sets of values. Alongside scientific techniques used by landscape archaeologists such as pollen analysis, oral histories provide an additional layer, a nuanced account, which is filled with particularities, temporary conditions, and most importantly, one deeply embedded within cultural circumstances. oral histories can help destabilize preconceived value placements and more simply, the use of features such as burial mounds. This expert versus lay knowledge dichotomy carries us into the next study. This centers on the idea that there are different actors within the landscape who have varying narratives and framings of the same thing. The researchers firstly analyzed Cornwall Council's policy document to establish the official policy narrative when it comes to landscape change. They then carried out 19 semi-structured interviews with interviewees identified through a purposive sampling strategy. This allowed them to pick key actors in local landscape management, either due to their position within the respective organizations or because of their engagement at parish or Cornwall Council as parish or Cornwall councillors. And within those interviews, the researchers focused on different story strands about landscape change, climate change, and adaptation, as seen on the screen. Then the strands were analyzed relative to each other to identify the larger line of argument stretching through the entire interview. Any strands circling around similar phenomena and following similar internal logics were grouped together to form encompassing narratives. They found that alongside the official policy narrative, other encompassing narratives existed. These were grouped as landscapes as natural systems, human-environment interaction, and spaces of production. What was surprising was that these constructions stand in contrast to each other and to the way in which the region is portrayed by its council. Carrying out these interviews with actors in local landscape management allowed the researchers to dig deeper into what people actually mean when they talk about landscapes and change. Notably, what resulted was the understanding that there are contrasting perspectives and even definitions on how landscapes are affected by climate change. Without being addressed, this can result in misunderstandings and cause obstacles for implementing sustainable adaptation governance. This research shows us the importance of seeking out and giving voice to local actors and stakeholders. It opens up the possibility for further dialogue and understanding of different people's constructions and rationales. Scenario building can also be a way we can explore and open discussions about change and possible futures. These researchers carried out 25 semi-structured interviews in each of their 6 European study areas. The main line of questioning focused around perception of agricultural decline and the change it brought about in upland areas. Then 12 out of the 25 were picked to be part of stakeholder panels. The stakeholder panels included people with different personal and professional backgrounds and took part in 3 meetings. In the second of these 3 meetings, 4 scenarios were introduced and discussed. Scenario building was an important vehicle to get participants to step outside of their comfort zones and their understanding of landscape as they knew it. Several photo series were produced illustrating the possible landscape changes in the 4 scenarios in different settings. The first scenarios were developed for the year 2030. 3 of them are on the screen. These scenarios were a business as usual scenario, an agricultural liberalization scenario, a managed change for biodiversity scenario, and in 3 of the 6 countries, a wilding scenario. Stakeholders were asked to assess the socioeconomic dimension, the visual landscape dimension, and the biodiversity dimension of each scenario. The main objective of the research was to explore the ways in which local stakeholders across European uplands advocate and assess different future scenarios. Scientific research that takes into account the views of local stakeholders has the potential to give a voice to those who are directly affected by political and administrative decisions, and whose daily actions shape and maintain such mountain areas. Research like this allows us to understand the views, needs, and perceived and actual threats of the various stakeholders and gives us an opportunity to debate them. One of my favorite researchers that I've come across is this one, where the researcher conducted 8 in-depth interviews with people who lived locally to Ickley, which were recorded and transcribed for the Wet Futures UK project. Poetic transcription uses the words of an interview to create a found poem. And here's one of the poems called The Continuation of History. It lifts my heart when I look to the hills, sparks my interest when I start digging into it, how the moor has been a background for the lives of other people. I mean, we've got history. You just walk out onto the moor and you hit the history. Mesolithic, Neolithic, Romans, Knights Templars, Normans, you name it, we've got it. Victorians used it on high days and holidays, then across the moor are tracks with Viking names. So much of it is still unknown, or if it was known, it's been forgotten. I see myself as playing a part, a small part, reviving those stories, reviving the memories, helping people understand where they live, look after it, create meaning. My first house I lived in with my husband, where my son was born. My first grandchild was born. Every event, I've got the moor as the background. Don't you see how it's always been there? Ickley Moor is the background to my life, and my life is a continuation of history. The researcher read through the transcript and picked out key words and phrases to create this poem from the participant's voice. Once they read and reread the interviews, they highlighted what chimed with the overall themes and feelings of the interviewees. They printed off the transcription and cut out the phrases, moving them around on the table. No words were added or changed, but they are not in the order which were spoken. The poems are an additional product that speak differently. The researcher says, and I quote, "A poem can hold some of those multiple meanings of landscapes and plural voices of landscapes in a single form. It allowed me to keep the voice of the participants alive in the research in a way I didn't think a couple of disembodied quotes might." End quote. I agree, poems as a medium are ones that people can engage with. Not everyone would choose a transcript or an academic paper over a poem. Exploring archives can be a rewarding and informative exercise. I am spending a lot of time getting to know the ones here at Bangor. The material in archives can help us trace back in time the politics, power relations, and responsibilities connected to landscape, and some of the legacies of those decisions that we are feeling today. What we find in archives can then be presented through experimental narration of history. Anticipatory history seeks to draw out certain themes and patterns that might not be visible or apparent in the current way we write history about places or structures. By creating a revised history, new discussions can take place, and people may possibly see the places that they've lived in differently. Of course, we work through our research and present it can take many forms. Some of the ways that speak to me is using graphic novels to document my processes, while zines and pamphlets are effective ways of sharing the messages and key points with other people. All the methods that I shared today and point towards may seem to many of us to lie beyond the discrete boundaries of our disciplines. But I urge us all to be inspired and that we are able to use these methodologies. I would like to end with these 2 photographs taken by young people. They were taken as part of the Camagor project, which enabled local communities to highlight the issues they felt important through different media. This is the decisive decade, and we are the ones designing, working, and researching now. The methodologies we choose can make an impact. Through them, we can support the legitimization of local decision-making and question the politics, power relations, and responsibilities connected to places and landscapes. Diolch i chi am wrando. Thank you for listening, and maybe see you in Wales.